Thank you all for joining us for new business models for the 21st century care. As you all know, the discussion about social platforms has shifted from focusing in the 90s about freedom of speech, democracy, public well-being, towards social platforms providing some major challenges to democracy and also peace. Social platforms and the discussion about social platforms is centered around online hate speech, distrust, polarization, you name it. Well, we put together this roundtable discussion because we want to imagine an alternative future. And it is actually already the case that over hundreds of platforms, there are builders, designers, tech developers who are building new innovative social platforms. There are also hundreds of volunteers volunteering as stewards on these platforms. And together, the builders and the stewards, they are the engine behind a new vision for social platforms. One of the issues that they face is funding, and this is what we want to talk to you about today. To my left is Dipti Doshi. She is a former Facebook employee. She quit, and she founded, together with her colleague Eli Pariser, she founded New Public. She also, yesterday, she was already here at Republica presenting the, Public Spaces Incubator. You can also check it out at the ZDF stand. And to my right is Mathilde Sanders, who is a former journalist based in the Netherlands at the University of Utrecht, and she is now doing research on public business models. My name is Dani Stockman. I'm the director of the Center for Digital Governance at the Hertie School, and we envision a very interactive discussion with you. So we will just get us started with some insights from both Dipti and Mathilde, and then we're going to open up the floor, and hopefully you can add to the discussion. If you have heard about new alternative business models that neither Mathilde nor Dipti raise, please jump in. Dipti, my first question goes to you. So what's wrong with the dominant business models? You know, they're mostly focusing on advertising, on subscriptions. What's wrong with them?
Yeah, even the title of our panel goes to for 21st century care. And when we think about who are kind of the vanguards of care and care in our society, I think nobody would raise their hand and say it's going to be the private companies. But yet, we have allowed our public square. We consider Twitter, X, Facebook, our Discords, our Reddits, our public square. And I think that there's two real challenges with this. One is just fundamentally this word public. They're not public. They're privately owned spaces whose customers are advertisers, not our citizens. And I think this is an audience that very well understands what the externalities of that are. And then second, I actually think there's a singular plural problem here. I think care is very hard to do at scale. And so this idea of one public square is just fundamentally wrong. We need multiple town squares, multiple public squares. We have multiple public parks here in Berlin. We have multiple libraries that are able to serve their citizens, the public, in small ways where care can really be manifested. And so for us at New Public, there's three main things it is that we look at when we think about kind of what the future can hold for us. One is this question around incentive structures and evolving new business models. Two is just fundamentally the technical infrastructure behind these systems. They're centralized and they're not interoperable. And I think we have to get to a future where we have decentralized platforms and protocols that are in fact interoperable. And I feel that we're just at the beginning of that movement. And then finally, a real lack of respect, and I think the previous talk in this room went to this topic as well, for the human leadership and care work that actually makes the internet a good place to be. So I think about Wikipedia, and I'm sure many of us look at Wikipedia as a healthy example. There are everyday moderators ensuring that that space is healthy. When I ask you to think about kind of what Facebook experience it is has been the most positive one you've had recently, I would imagine that many of you would say that that happened in a Facebook group, which also has a moderator or an admin at the helm of them. And in fact, I think this word moderator or admin is actually the wrong, it kind of devalues what they're actually contributing to our healthy internet, a public life on the internet. And so that's why at New Public we call them community stewards, because they're doing this work of stewarding healthy spaces for us online.
Mathilde, what do you think is wrong with current advertising and subscription-based business models?
I think a lot of the points that Deepti points out I agree with. One additional thing that I could add is that I think demand-driven content as a value proposition is problematic, and that this focus on quantitative metrics is really something that would have to change in a public sphere. Secondly, I also think that currently the existing models also need this decentralization, which would also mirror the offline society. Now you have global platforms and you have individual users, but there's nothing in between. And I think we would need to go towards a future where you have a place for organizations and where you decentralize data storage and exploitation to organizational level locally. As a new model. Ethan Zuckerman spoke about the Fediverse, where you have a plurality of smaller organizations that are, in a public ecosystem. I would think, and then also, I think we need more diversity in the types of customers, the types of stakeholders that are paying customers, because currently we have mostly advertisers paying, but there are so many other stakeholders in society that could be financing and that could be paying customers, and this would really change the business model. And also I think the ownership, which stakeholders are owners of the digital environment. There we have a lack of diversity as well with these investor owners and venture capital. And if we empower other stakeholders such as the content makers and individual users as owners of their own digital environment, I think that would offer space for new business models, because there would not be this profit maximization goal, which would allow for alternatives and maybe also for models where you would have data exploitation for social purposes instead of commercial purposes.
And Mathilde, since you already mentioned a number of factors, diversity, greater diversity, ownership, and so forth, can you talk about alternatives? What are some of the new innovative funding ideas that you have come across, both in your research, but also based on your practical experience in the Netherlands?
Yeah, I have some. Well, I think we don't only need new innovations, we can also learn a lot from what's happening in old media. As for organizations, and where you have platform cooperatives, for instance, as options. And also, I think we're working on this project called Pub Hubs, which is a concept of what's going to be a future public social network that's actually being built. And here we're looking at this question: how are we going to finance this now? And are we going to maybe also you could opt for going back to old systems like user fees. In Germany, for instance, you have this individual household is paying for old media, and why don't we have that for the digital sphere? I mean, this is like a vital digital infrastructure that that should be financed. And I think also when you decentralize financing to the level of individuals, this does not concentrate power as much. And I think this is very important in tech, that if tech is very centralized technologically, you would need decentralization at the organizational level behind it. So you would need to decentralize ownership, for instance, via cooperatives, and you would need to decentralize also customers. So take that to the lowest level to empower users, individual users. And As for new models, I think, well, what you're referring to as well, the moderation services might be a new moderation community stewards or community managers. I think that would be a new profession, and I think it would be good if at some stage there could be business models around financing them. And we were saying just now over lunch as well, like we would be willing to pay for a safe environment where we would know there's like a human gatekeeper, moderator. I would pay for it. You would pay for it. So I think that's a new industry, hopefully, that will emerge. And you see with what's in Reddit, for instance, that's the value of Reddit is that they have these community stewards. So it's I think now this realization is coming also maybe hopefully to big tech as well.
And Dipti, at New Public, you have an archive. If I counted correctly, there are 242 cases currently in your data set of social platforms. What kind of new alternative ways of funding have you come across?
Yeah, I mean, I think funding innovation needs to kind of come in parallel with the innovation around business models as well. And so I see these things kind of on a spectrum. And I think that yesterday, for those of you who were here, we presented our partnership with some of the larger public broadcasters. ZAF is one, CBC Radio Canada, RTBF, and SRG. I think that we cannot assume that public funding cannot play an important role in the creation of public spaces into the future. And I think that we have to kind of unlock our imagination and maybe some of our fear, especially given some of the political ideologies that are in tension right now in societies all over the world about what that could look like. But I think that we must have, in the same way, public parks are funded through our public. We must have public social spaces online that are funded through our public. This doesn't mean that it's in competition with Facebook or that all spaces on the internet need to be this way. We have bookstores and libraries. So we need to have some of these public options available to us. And I do think public financing is a really important part of this ecosystem. And then on the other hand, I do think that what Mathilde is speaking to in terms of user fees and membership-driven spaces can be, in fact, really interesting. I do have some concerns. Right now it seems as though there's like these two binaries. There's the advertising, and then that means that the product is available for free, and as a result, all of us can be in it, and they truly are more pluralistic. But then on the other end, if we end up we have subscriptions, and subscriptions, by definition, mean that they're not going to be as pluralistic as the more public spaces can be. Some people will not be able to afford the subscription and will be kept out of it. And so we've been interested in kind of some of these models that we're seeing around tipping, donations. We talked about this over lunch too, like Patreon, and how content creators are in fact, given tips by their consumers to kind of support and sustain the work. I think that there's a lot that can be taken, lots of lessons that can be taken from there as we think about supporting these community stewards. I mean, these moderators, when I was at Facebook, I was in charge of our relationships with group admins. There's one woman, Lola Omolola. She runs a group of 2 million women around the world. It's called FIN, Females in Nigeria. She told me she spends 60 hours a week moderating the group and is paid zero, and is frankly not even like recognized or even given any kind of credit for the work it is that she's doing, but yet Facebook is benefiting on the other end of it. And so this layer of kind of the humans who are stepping into these kind of very vitrolic places, but yet making them beautiful, I believe we really need to figure out how we value them and create infrastructure to support them. Financially is one piece of it, with recognition is another, but also with tooling that supports them to create the public-spirited spaces that they want to.
That's a great example, Dipti, because it really illustrates the need to show some appreciation for some of the work that is being done by volunteers. Now, I think it's time to open up the floor to the audience, and we're particularly interested in sort of your either any questions about anything that has come up so far that was raised, but also if you have any personal experience with a new innovative business model, please share. And please state your name and your affiliation.
Oh, okay. I'm Ian Forrester, and I work for BBC R&D in the UK. To be sure, I've got lots of questions, but the one I wanted to ask was, with the pressure for public service kind of coming under so much pressure now, do you think that's a viable way that it can support some of these things that you're talking about? So what I really mean is there's a fund there, and it's under pressure from lots of different countries where they just want to pay for Netflix, or they want to do it themselves, and so they see this kind of like tax, and they don't see the benefit of it, and so they're removing a lot of their public institutions. And so do you think that fund will dry up as such and won't be viable in the future? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. So, what if I'm understanding your question right, let me just restate it to make sure. You're wondering about kind of the trust in public institutions as distribution channels for public spaces online, and also not only maybe trust, but actually like financial viability of that. Is that right? Right, so, okay, yes, hear you. I think our project, for example, it's just the beginning, but the project that we spoke about yesterday has brought together ZAF, CBC Radio Canada, from Switzerland, SRG, and RTBF from Belgium. And I think it is an example of how public broadcasters, in particular in this case, are stepping up to the plate to actually take the risk. And I will note that Corporation for Public Broadcasting in the US did not accept to join the partnership. They did not have the same risk appetite nor kind of imagination to join this group. And so I do think that it is possible, slowly to start kind of, but we need to make sure that these case studies, as they kind of get into the hands of the public, actually work, because that's my largest concern, is that we will lose credibility and trust if these spaces are not as dynamic and as joyful and as entertaining as the other spaces are. And so I'm hopeful, but we have a long way to go.
So on that point, I've been teaching about these topics for 3 years now, and I invited also a number of speakers, and I had the Wikimedia Foundation also come and talk to my students. And so Wikipedia, as everybody knows, is based on a donation-based business model. And so one of the points that was raised in those conversations was always that they thought that donation-based business models could not actually provide the funding for a space that would be as dynamic and as sort of user-targeted as, for example, Facebook or Instagram or any of the commercial platforms. Can you or one of you also speak to that? So what does it mean to have a more public, perhaps publicly funded or donation-based funding scheme while also providing a very dynamic social platform?
I think one of the options we have not yet covered is the data options, the data exploitation options, which are often associated with that which big tech is not doing very well with profiling. But I think there are a lot of opportunities there as well. And the platform we're designing has also decentralization of ownership of data towards a level of organizations. So, yeah, that you bring back, those data to those organizations that, have their own communities and can exploit that in a sense. And I think there's a business model there too. And you know, data commons can be used for social purposes, so I think, yeah, that we should not ignore those options either. And I think, you know, in that sense, also for the new business models that you have, where you have for instance, the BBC and the copyright it has on all its content and all its archive. That's something that, you know, for AI development, why sell it to OpenAI? Why not, you know, use it for yourself? And
yeah, I think there's a question.
Yes, there's a question in the back, but do you want to jump in very briefly?
I just want to jump into this just very quickly, because I think this is a community, the Republica community is one that we care deeply about. I think it's very important that as we think about building these social experiences of the future that live up to these kind of democratic and civic values, we do not build civic, what I call broccoli tech. They cannot be experiences that, like, you know, we should use in order to be a good citizen. They need to feel like chocolate cake, like they need to be sexy and appealing. And I always give the example on Facebook Messenger, when you say happy birthday to somebody, the confetti blows up and the hats show up. Like, this is joy, and it's about meeting everyday people where they are living their everyday lives. And so I think that often our community can become a bit too ideological about what is right, and forget that, like, people, what we need is mass participation of the public, and the mass publics are not thinking about democracy or even, you know, the DSA or GDPR. They are just thinking about getting through their lives. And so we really need to be figuring out how we meet people where they are and create experiences that support them to make their everyday life better.
There's a question in the back.
Yeah, thanks. So I feel this problem, this challenge that we have the present political sphere that is kind of shifting towards the right. So we have this movement with the far-right extremists, with the AfD in Germany, and I feel like social media has had a major role. I would argue that social media had a major role in the whole shift worldwide towards the right. And now we have this conundrum that we're talking about a governmental funded infrastructure for whatever it might be, a Fediverse or just a social media platform. And I do wonder, in this light of that, we are now going towards the right, and that maybe they would just reverse those ideas that we're now speaking about. Wouldn't it make sense to put it on a higher entity, for example, on the European Union level, where more countries work together to provide these infrastructures, so that also not only one governmental shift could then end a social media platform, which I think is very good with Facebook for all the evil it has done, in my opinion, that they have, because of their business model, the opportunity to provide a platform worldwide for, 15, 20 years? Yeah.
Mathilde, do you want to come in here?
I'm not exactly sure what your question is, but you're looking at the options of a European platform or European big tech, which doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think the question is about the tension between centralization versus decentralization, and a lot of these new digital spaces, they're very community, local based.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think for Europe, maybe decentralized platforms would work very well, actually. If you look at the offline, social and political structure and democratic history, I think this really matches the technological decentralized structures of, for instance, Mastodon. And it's a user-friendliness problem that's stopping it.
Yeah, why is it a user-friendliness problem?
Because you don't have a centralized data storage, and for search that's really difficult. But Threads, Meta is also on ActivityPub on the decentralized protocols, and Blue Sky, which is Jack Dorsey. So they're also, and these are just going to be interoperable platforms because of the protocol. So the walled gardens are going to disappear in the future. And I think, yeah, for a European future, that would be, yeah, that would work, because you could have a bottom-up, union, which we have in Europe politically as well. So I think technologically that's going to be supported by the new decentralized protocols, if those are really going to be the future.
It seems to me there is also sometimes it's helpful to think about advantages and disadvantages of these solutions. So I think in our conversations, one of the advantages of the more centralized, or if you want to European, or it could be global level, would be that it's more searchable and user-friendly. But if you go more decentralized and you work a lot with the user community and volunteers, then it's much easier in a smaller community to create a common sense of values on which basis you moderate the platform. So there is I think depending on what you want to prioritize, you will favor different solutions.
I heard something else in the question, which I think is about political capture, correct? Like, as we are in a moment where more and more of our politics are driven by the far right, and then a concern about kind of the impact of democracy if in fact these spaces are publicly owned and then captured. And I think this gets to a fundamental question around governance of these spaces. And again, back to my earlier point around scale and public spaces versus public space. And when we look into the future, what we're looking, the world it is that we're looking to kind of craft and create is one of multiple public spaces where in fact the governance is at the level of the community and not necessarily at the level of kind of this centralized force that you're mentioning. And so I think this also is another place for innovation, is in kind of alternative governance models that bring power and decision-making down.
And I think also, may I just...
Last point.
I think you can cut up decentralization and different types of decentralization. And what's happening now, I mean, you can be technologically centralized, highly centralized. That's fine, as long as the organization behind this platform is decentralized. And that's currently not the environment we're in. So you should look at the corporate governance, and we should look at who owns Meta and what type of ownership do you need there, and what type of governance does that organization need? Because if you can't solve it technologically, you need to solve it organizationally.
We're coming to the end of. I don't even have a mic anymore.
Finished.
In one word, Mathilde, can you just describe what is your wish for alternative business models for the future? One word. Public. And you, Dipti?
Mine is imagination.
All right, so let us all be imaginative about social platforms for a new public space. Thank you all so much. Thank you.